Hey now, welcome to episode 1 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. It is technically November 15th, 2023, just past midnight, literally 12:01. So technically, as the rules once said, if you haven't gone to sleep yet, it's still the 14th. My voice is arguing with me right now. It might be winning. We'll find out. But that is no reason not to pursue this first official episode of the reboot of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I've told this story before, now and then, especially when I first moved here, 10 years ago. I moved here from Silicon Valley, the original Silicon Valley, not the new Silicon Valley here in Las Vegas. So it's an interesting story to me. I don't know if it was interesting to people when I was telling it. I'm going to leave out one of the characters. That person is no longer, never really was worth talking about, but it was one of the factors that brought me here. So I'll make a note at the end. But this story will be about my part of the road to Vegas. We start back in mid-July 2013 when I moved to Vegas from Silicon Valley. Officially, according to the lease, I suppose, the 1st of August 2013. So this being November 15th, we are well into our 11th year. I had less stuff to move than I would have otherwise. I'm about to tell you why. I moved here without a specific plan. I was not relocating to Vegas for the vast opportunity. I was not moving here to be a dealer, bartender, DJ, event planner. I really just moved to Vegas as striking out into the great unknown. In fact, it wasn't until I arrived in Vegas that I learned of the downtown project, which we'll also get to in a moment. So what led me to move? It was on April 8th, if I recall. I actually have an article in the show notes, in the link section, an article about my house fire on Angel Avenue. If you do read the article, it's in the San Jose Mercury News from 2013. It was about 10 days later, and I think it was April 8th. It's in the article. I originally wrote down the time was around 1:30 in the morning, but it was actually closer to 3:30 in the morning. At 1:30 in the morning, I was returning from being out. A person I knew, who I will mention later, was going through what would eventually become a divorce, and we were sitting at our local down the street. So I got home probably 1:32 in the morning. Not a lot of consuming, not a lot of potables drank, but couple, not much, not really. I did not come home and pass out on the couch, but I did in fact come home and sit on my couch, and then I half dozed off, probably could have fallen asleep completely, but I drifted off a little tiny bit. Fully clothed, which was convenient. And then I heard a bunch of knocking on the window. So let's say that I got home, I was home, sat on the couch, probably maybe even 2:30, somewhere in there. And I remember I was flipping through the old phone. I think it was an Android device. Of course it was an Android device. I've never owned an iPhone. So flipping through my Android device, probably reading some mail, going through tweets, etc., etc. Remember Twitter? And so I was on the couch. Phone dropped out of my hand onto the floor. That's important. And suddenly knocking on the window, yelling, chaos. Of course, I'm jarred awake. So probably, I'm going to say 20, 30 minutes of nap, light slumber. So I'm jarred awake. Luckily, I wasn't in a deep sleep. I would have been lost. So I'm jarred awake. I look out the window. I think I looked through the peephole through my front door. People milling around, freaking out, knocking on the windows. If I'm looking through the front door peephole, there's a large window on my left. So people are knocking. They're right there. So I'm I think I'm going to go out through the other side of the house. So if the window to my left is perpendicular to the door, the other side of the home, the kitchen, leads out to the garage. It was almost like a ranch style house, so longer than wide. So the side window on one of the longer sides, the kitchen on the opposite long side, go out into the garage, go out through the door, the garage door, the person door of the garage to the side of the house, and I see a wall of flame. Kind of shocking. Now, at this moment, at the moment, the fire was on was coming out of the next door neighbor, the other yard. So I wasn't really sure what was happening. A little shock, and probably a police officer. Sunnyvale. This is in Sunnyvale, California, by the way. Sunnyvale has a Department of Public Service, combined, triple trained. So police are like 95% of the time first on scene. So probably a police officer comes through the fence that's on the side of the house, sees me, like we literally both bumped into each other coming through our respective portals at about the same time. He says, are you the only one in the house? I said, yeah. He said, come out. Come to the front. So I go to the front. At this point, so I lived in a duplex, so the back half was like symmetric. The back half, to my knowledge, was not yet on fire, but it was a very windy night. I want to say something like 40-mile-an-hour gusts. So the wind was blowing, and of course, not in my favor. So the wind is basically blowing the flames from, so that would have been like, depending on how you want to orient yourself, the front of the house was facing the 101 freeway, sort of north, and so basically the house to the west. So it was eastern wind, gusting at 40, I think, miles per hour. So I went to the front of the house. There's tons of neighbors. Everybody's like freaking out, which was kind of nice. The upside of living in a neighborhood is that your neighbors will try to save you. So good for that. I am drinking some tea, by the way. Hopefully my voice will make it through this story. So so I'm across the street now, ironically, in the driveway of a neighbor who used to blast music directly at the short side of the house, so that when I was living with a person, she used to get very upset. This was a different person. She used to get very upset, and she would make me go across the street, complain, your music is too loud. So I was in their driveway now, house on fire. The wind eventually blows the gusts over. The firefighters are starting to show up, so we're talking maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe, less than 10. Who knows how time is flowing at this point. I will say two interesting things at this point. I had gone through SNAP training, Sunnyvale Neighbors Actively Prepared. It's a city version of CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team, which is part of FEMA. That's a national program. I'm also part of CERT in Las Vegas. That's for another day. So I was completely familiar. I had already done SNAP exercises with fire, police. I knew where the fire station closest to my home. It actually took less time to walk to it than to drive the equipment around. Sort of silly, I guess. But the firefighters were arriving. The fire had moved across the yard, across the fence, across the property line, I guess, and had caught the back half of the duplex. My neighbors from the back half of the duplex, husband, wife, daughter, they all got out okay. So at this point, and as far as I know, the neighbors where the fire started, out of the home, no immediate danger, no loss of life, unless things go drastically wrong. So now it's just a property issue. Extinguish the flames, save what they can. So the fire's in the back of the house. They are deluging the back of the house. In the meantime, the fire moves to the front where my place is, but luckily they stopped it before it got all the way to the front. So without getting into too much detail, I have some pictures somewhere. It was an interesting time. My clothing and my computers were as far away from the fire as would be possible and still be inside the house. So that worked out in my favor. When the fire was extinguished, the back of the duplex where the owners lived was a total loss. It was nuts. The owner, the husband, was pacing up and down the street, yelling, "Why aren't you putting it out?" and freaking out. And again, once you go through SNAP or CERT or similar, or maybe you're a firefighter yourself, you know how things go. They did what they could. They did what they were supposed to do. The humans were out of the house, so all things considered, could have been much worse. So the Red Cross was there. They said, we're going to put you up in a hotel for 3 days. So I said, thank you. And I remember them saying, you're probably the most calm, cool, collected person in this circumstance we've ever talked to. And I said, well, I'm out here. We're looking at the fire from out here. Everybody's fine. So they're doing what they're supposed to do. I did what I'm supposed to do. Me being excited is not going to help anything. So things are working exactly as they're supposed to. And they're like, well, it is not common to see this reaction. I said, well, it is not common for me to be in this circumstance to give this reaction. So we both learned something that evening, I suppose. Anyway, so I cannot I remember. I was going to say, I can't remember how I got to the hotel, which was in Mountain View, a city to the north, which is silly. So that's why I was, Mountain View is north on the peninsula. The home I was living in faces the 101, because the 101 runs sort of sideways, it's sort of north. So it's a little weird, that part of the south tip of the bay. So if you look at a map, you'll see what I'm talking about. So Mountain View, one town towards San Francisco, got a hotel room there. Now, my car was completely out of harm's way. I used to park it in the front in a little driveway rather than in the garage, which was where the fire was. So car was fine. Before I left, because I was not allowed in the house anymore, the entire duplex was condemned. So that, as I sometimes tell people, the beginning of spontaneous homelessness. So the firefighter said, we can go in and get things. Is there any particular thing you need? This was a leading question. I don't think they had asked it quite so succinctly. But I said, I think my phone is by the couch. So they went and got my phone. And I had, luckily, I had a charger in my car. I had not been driving that night. So my car, luckily the charger was in the car. Luckily, my car keys were in my pocket because I had not undressed, so I was still fully clothed from the night, the evening out. I didn't have anything else. I had no bags, nothing. So I got in my car and I drove to the hotel and I checked in. And there we go. So that was the beginning. That was April 8th, 2013. The beginning of an interesting time. The Silicon Valley rents were insane. I had lived in the same place for 2005 to 2000. In fact, it was, I think it was like September 2005. Yeah, that sounds right. I moved back to Silicon Valley after I moved to Arizona for 4 years, and I was working in San Francisco and so on. So I had been living in this place, and I think they raised the rent like $25 in the whole time. So I think the rent was like $1,200 a month, walking distance to downtown Sunnyvale, to the train station, to grocery store. So it was really a pretty good deal. 2-bedroom, garage. So not a bad deal. So yeah, I had not experienced any sort of rent increase through the downturn in 2008. Santa Clara County, by the way, was like the only county in California that did not have any housing deflation, I guess. So housing prices remained stable. Crazy. So yeah, Silicon Valley. So I had to find a place to live. So I started looking around for places to live. Quite an eye opener. The next couple of months were revelatory. They were depressing, a little bit sad, and I really started getting a taste for why I would want to stay or why I would rather go. I used to tell people, maybe it is time to go. Maybe I don't love this place anymore. When I graduated from college, which is a story I'll tell another time, I had to work quite hard to get a job in Silicon Valley, which to me seemed like the place to be for my interest area, computer technology. So when I first moved there in 1993 to 2001, quite a ride through the .com, right to the .bomb, moved to Arizona, moved back. So here I am house fire, crashing in a hotel provided by the Red Cross. What would come next? So between April, we'll say April 10th, by the time my compass stopped spinning. So April 10th, start looking for places to live, start looking for a hotel room because I got 3 days. So it turns out you can book a hotel room in California, probably most places, for 29 days. On 30 days, you become a resident, and you can't be a resident of a hotel room, basically. That's a simplification. So you can only book for 29 days. So between April and the middle of July, a few hotel rooms, a few stories along the way, and searching for homes. I will say the first 2 days, I would basically drive to my neighborhood, take a look at the house from the outside. You know, it was wrapped in a fence with condemnation signs and stuff. Do not enter. And my neighbors would say, "Hey, is everything okay?" And I'm like, "Well, you know, I'm here. My stuff's in there. What's left of it?" And again, luckily, the things that I really needed were in there. I can't remember how. A couple weeks later, I was able to get my computer and some other things, some clothing. So once they did the safety inspection or whatever they did, I was allowed to go into the house. I remember my favorite quote. Got an email from the owner of the place. Be careful, because they tore down the ceiling. The ceiling, there was a ceiling everywhere. Be careful. Luckily, they stopped doing it in the kitchen because the fire did not go all the way to the front of the house. So the kitchen was within it. So they pulled down the ceiling now. Asbestos. There's a little bit of asbestos everywhere. Oh, good. So saved a few things, a couple of items of clothing at that point, and got my computer. And I commenced my real searching for a home, place to live, so on. And I remember the funny part, I went to my local coffee shop, set up camp to use the Wi-Fi, and started looking. And someone sitting near me doesn't look right at me, speaking to a person at the table with her, and says, "I smell a campfire. Do you smell something like a campfire?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." I mean, for years and years, things were still blackened by fire carbon. Still the scent of house fire is one you do not forget. Anyway, so by the time it was June, in fact, on June 21st, my birthday, we went to Rooster Tea Feathers in Sunnyvale, California, and we saw one of my favorite stand-ups at the time. I think he's disappeared, but Tommy Johnigan had a good set. That was a good time. And it was that evening the decision was made, because I think it was the day before I had checked out a person's basement in San Jose. She had no parking, so it would be street parking, which I think you had to get a permit from the city, San Jose. And then there was the ceiling. I'm not a tall person, and I just cleared the ceiling. There were some parts where I had to duck a little bit. So it was not a comfortable spot. There was a refrigerator and a sink and a bathroom and a hot plate. There was probably something like 500 square feet. I think she wanted $2,500 a month. Insane. Absolutely insane. So after the Tommy Johnigan show, walking back to the hotel, and a discussion was had with the nameless person, and we decided that Silicon Valley was not the place to be. It had run its course. So where to move next? Well, I grew up in Phoenix, so I knew I didn't want to go back there. Mostly because the job market for me was not really non-existent. So kind of felt like I'd been there, done that. Didn't really work out. LA didn't seem like a great idea. More of a lateral move, probably. So the possibility of moving to Vegas came up, and it was well, who knows? Who knows what could happen? So the move to Vegas. So flip through the notes here. So we got a 24-foot truck. I packed up my stuff in the first third. I am normally pretty good at moving. I had a lot less stuff. It was all installed. So in the interim, I was able to retrieve as much as I could. That's where I knew that a lot of my stuff was blackened. Certainly smelled like a matchstick, burnt. So that was a good time. So I was able to put my stuff in storage. Basically everything I owned now fit in a storage unit, like a garage, like a, what is it? Probably like a 15-foot storage unit with the garage door, like a rolling door rather than a normal door. So all my stuff was in there. So got the big truck, loaded it up. It was kind of fun because I had to pack in the storage unit because I really didn't have, I wouldn't say time, but when I moved out of my house, what was left of it, I was just throwing stuff in the truck by myself, of course, put it in the storage unit. And so I packed up. I'm a big fan of the pack everything in similar size boxes and then get some pallet wrap, which is a big heavy duty cellophane roll, and you just wrap up everything. So rather than using pallets, however, you stack the boxes up, you wrap them so they don't fall over. Then when you roll them into a truck, you stick them to each other so they are tacky, and it all kind of moves like one big giant springy. So if you like go over a curb or something, things don't just go flying through the inside of the truck. They all kind of support each other. It's like columns in a building, cross braced by the tackiness of the wrap. So my part worked out well. The other person in the move, I will spare you some of the Dunning-Kruger comments, but it turns out she had never really moved like this before. So the one and only time she acknowledged that I was correct, she said, "Wow, turns out you did know how to pack," because her stuff was all over the place. I drove the truck a couple days before. It took forever. Going up a hill in a 24-foot truck is not as exciting as it sounds. I arrived at this house that we had leased, started unpacking. I think I basically unpacked the entire truck by myself over the next 2 days. And then I brought the truck to the place. And then I waited for the other person to drive her car. She arrived. So that was August 1st. And that was the beginning of my time in Vegas. I started meeting people in November. So between August, September, and probably end of October, I think. August, September, setting up the stuff, right? Trying to, getting the internet access, getting phone, cell phone configuration, figuring out what was going on where, trying to figure out where things were around the city of Las Vegas and Clark County. And I happened upon, I cannot even remember where, a mention of the Downtown podcast. Now, when I moved to Vegas, I was before I got on the road. So the decision to move had been made. And then someone sent me an email and said, "Hey, have you heard about this Downtown project?" And I had no idea what they were talking about. So I looked, I cannot remember which newspaper. It was probably in a San Jose newspaper. Like, look at these people in Vegas trying to be the next Silicon Valley. So when I got here, I did eventually figure out where things were, what was going on with the Downtown project and all that. I had my Scion XB, so I drove to downtown, wandered around a little bit. Eventually, I found out about the Downtown podcast, so I went to it, and I believe it was on Wednesday nights. So I went to a production of the Downtown project. I really had no idea, kind of wandering into this. I remember walking into the Ogden. It's a high-rise condo apartment building. Wandered into the front desk, and I said, "Is the Downtown podcast here?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, go ahead. Elevator." Like, okay, sounds good. Corner apartment, condo, I don't even know. I guess technically apartments at the time. Don't know. Walked in, met Dylan and Pavel and Jackie. And there I was at the first episode that I had been to. And I want to say it was the end of October 2013. Now this, if you are familiar with the Downtown Project, this is when this 2013 timeframe was when the Downtown Project was really starting to ramp up. I often use the term blooming. It was, the flower was opening after growing for a year or two. I think a year. And so there you go. So I just walked in off the street, saw the digs. Eventually I met Dylan. I think actually it was Pavel who said something like, "Hey, do you know how to work a DSLR?" And I was like, "Yeah." Sure. So I helped them record an episode one time, so a couple weeks later. So by then, the conversations began, new in town, great. I moved here from Silicon Valley. They're like, really? The number one comment I would get from people, so you moved here from Silicon Valley? I said, yeah. They said, that's weird. They could not fathom the possibility of moving to Las Vegas from Silicon Valley. Well, I did. Of course, now people do it frequently. You can run into them at Tech Alley, kicking the tires, trying to figure out if they made the right decision. I don't know if they did. And at the time, though, 10 years ago, it was an exciting time. It was a lot of buzz in the air. This is one reason that we're doing the Downtown Project retrospective for Cafe Genius. Try to quantify some of that buzz so we figure out what worked and what didn't. But when I got there, the Downtown Project was an interesting way of discovering what was happening and meeting people and determining what's going on. They used to have it on the same night, as I discovered, as the work in progress community dinner. So somebody would sponsor pizza, beer, whatever. And you can go and meet people and whatnot. And then you'd walk over to the Downtown Podcast. Then eventually it kind of settled on walking across another street, walking across, I guess both Ogden and Stewart, to get to the Gold Spike, Gold Nuggets on Fremont. Get to the Gold Spike, which Tony Hsieh had converted into the downtown living room, big open space. At some points, beanbag chairs and beds and stuff. People just lounge around, take it easy. So on Wednesday nights, there'd be kind of a big mixer, people from all over. They used to do the Downtown Ranger and downtown tour stuff. So there was always somebody wandering around checking out downtown Las Vegas and seeing what the Downtown Project was. And they would come to the Downtown Podcast, or they would go see various other things. They'd eventually end up at the Gold Spike or other activities. So there was always like a crank turning of engagement and discussion. A lot of people were sort of amateur ombudsman, telling the story with their view of things. So it was a pretty energized time to land. Mostly invited in. There were a couple of people who had drunk all of the Kool-Aid concerning return on community at the time, and so they were really not interested in people or activities going on beyond downtown. I think that was on them. That was probably a misinterpretation, like too draconian. But for the most part, people were fairly welcoming. A lot of interesting people, a lot of people from other places, which is generally true of Las Vegas, but also most definitely true of the Downtown Project population. I put names to faces over time. Probably the number one thing that led to formation of relationships of any kind, personal, of course. The fact that I moved from Silicon Valley, and then by January, I had accepted an offer to work for Intel. There was no Intel. There still is not Intel in Nevada. So as far as they were concerned, wait, you moved here from Silicon Valley and you're working for Intel. You're the only Intel employee in Nevada. Why, yes, we will have a meeting with you. So that was very convenient from just an engagement perspective. I was able to talk to a lot of people, kind of got around and then as it turns out, and I cannot for the life of me find the publication, but Harvey Mudd College often gets noticed. When I was attending that fine institution, I'm serious. It was a decent place, probably still is. It had received very high and in some cases number one rankings from U.S. News and World Report for colleges, private colleges, technical schools, things like this. So it was always well ranked. Being a small school, it was really easy to know people, stay in touch with people. So a whole network of mudders out there. But on the flip side of that coin, several mudders in Vegas, in keeping with Vegas tradition. I have never spoken to any of them directly. Only Dave Wagner and I have exchanged some, it might have been LinkedIn direct messages, but it was certainly not meeting up somewhere because that's how Vegas is. So basically, right at that time, and again, I cannot remember where it was. It might have been U.S. News and World Reports. I have looked. I was unable to find it. There was a publication that came out talking about Silicon Valley. And of course, Vegas will always be jealous, green with envy. What made Silicon Valley? And they pointed out the three critical academic institutions. Stanford, of course. And I have brought this up in my Cafe Genius Impresarios show. I have brought it up at other times in general. I will probably bring it up here. Professor Ternan, after World War II, exceedingly well known and respected for his work in radar, electronics, especially radar, moved to Stanford University, became director of engineering or similar. I'll pull up his particulars when I dive into this. The history of Silicon Valley is very interesting. It starts in the late 40s, after World War II. I think 47. Professor Ternan goes to Stanford, convinces Shockley to move from somewhere in Cambridge, probably at MIT. He had just gotten his physics Nobel Prize, semiconductors. Says, hey, Shockley, your mom lives out here in the Bay Area. Why don't you move your stuff out here and start a company? So Shockley Semiconductors starts in Palo Alto, I think, so somewhere near Stanford on the peninsula. So it might have been in Mountain View. I don't remember. Well, I will do some refreshing. But essentially, Shockley Semiconductors, Ternan suggested to both Hewlett and Packard that they continue with their startup ideas, working in a shed or a garage or anywhere they could. Convinces the government to start sending projects his way. Like, you should send government money towards Stanford so that we can do technology development here on the West Coast. So Stanford was one of the three mentioned in this article. The second was Berkeley, UC Berkeley. A couple of smart people come out of that place. So UC Berkeley, Stanford, plenty of stuff to talk about as far as the roots of Silicon Valley, how you don't just sprinkle money on top of a place and it becomes Silicon Valley. You actually have a culture of innovation that develops and so on. And then as a surprise to even me at the time, I was moved to laughter, actually, because I was so out of left field. Stanford, UC Berkeley, Harvey Mudd College. Like, why? So the person who wrote the article seemed to feel that the influx of people from Southern California, from Harvey Mudd College, helped to fuel the eventual explosion of innovation and over valuations and so on of Silicon Valley. So back in 2013. So an interesting time. So when I would talk to people and I would mention, of course, I gotta play the cards I have in my hand. I just moved here from Silicon Valley, house fire, trying out Vegas. Just got a job with Intel, graduated from Harvey Mudd. Everybody wants to know, why did I move here? What are you doing? One of my favorite conversations was with, what was his name? It was Mike and I cannot remember. Steve. Mike and Steve. Mike and Steve were intimately connected to the College of Engineering, UNLV, DRI, Sierra Nevada, not the brewery, the tech company. I met up with them at a luncheon, randomly happened to be sitting next to Steve, mentioned that I took the Leadership Sunnyvale program. He said, oh, there's a Leadership Las Vegas. So we started talking about, city scale developments and so on. And, oh, you're from Silicon Valley. So he invited Mike to come over and we were talking for probably another 2 hours after. So we used to have the Three Amigo coffee meetup, mostly at Starbucks. And the number one question, and I used to get this all the time, what would it take for us here in Vegas to be the next Silicon Valley? And my glib answer was, as it is now, you need a time machine and Stanford. I said, basically, there is no infrastructure here to enable the sort of physical innovation that was taking place in Silicon Valley for decades. No one is going to build a chip fab here. No one is building lab space in general. There was a biotech move. There's nuclear medicine. Now, that's something that you could do in Vegas because of the test site. You can do a lot of nuclear medicine. You can do a lot more, actually. But Silicon Valley had an entire, has like a 40-year, at least, head start on just innovation and cultural cultivation, right? So I said, really, unless you're talking about laptops, there's no infrastructure here. But what I did suggest was that because so many people were coming here, there should be a connection between education, local talent, some sort of facilities that would be driven by academia, and the people that were visiting. So they connected me with Rama, the Dean of Engineering at UNLV. I suggested that they should have something like a clinic program to connect students with startups, because it turns out that the downtown project was a great thing for entrepreneurs, but there was no on-ramp, if you will. There was no invitation. There was no cattle call, however you want to. I don't mean that in a negative way. There was no invitation extended to the people that would work for these entrepreneurs. So the downtown project was existing in a silo of sorts. People were trying to start companies, and I remember Peter Tomasic and his co-founder of one of his startups, Scott Giovanni, I believe it was. I ran into them at a launch party at Hyde Bellagio for a company called Influencer, without an E, so I ended with just an R. And they said, hey, where would you go to find talent? And I said, that's a good question, because they're not inviting talent. They're only inviting founders. Arguably on the tech side, but just in general, I think if you were starting a restaurant, it was a little bit easier to find people. But if you're starting a tech company, you really were left with whoever was going to find you randomly, whoever was going to move to Vegas, trying to work for somebody until they started their own thing, probably, which was how Silicon Valley worked anyway, or reach out to academia. So I had a meeting with Rama and Mike and Steve, told them about a clinic program at Harvey Mudd College. He said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. So the specifics of that will be another episode at some point. But then the sort of next phase of that, when I was talking to Zach Miles, who has since returned, he left for a while and returned to UNLV recently. I said, you know what you guys need? You need a way to connect all these people, students, local talent, visiting startups, because you don't have the resources. You don't have the lab space. Nobody's going to come here to build prototypes because you don't have. There was the Sin Shop. Factorly was the fever dream of someone who will not be named. And then there was Local Motors was trying to have a maker space and a prototyping facility that got screwed up by Factorly. So that's a whole nother tale of intrigue and backstabbing of sorts, which is a common thing here in Vegas, by the way. So I suggested to Zach there should be a way of facilitating this innovation. I'm using today's terminology, but it was basically enable innovation from people who don't live here or who are not based here, but who can visit here, because we have lots of hotel rooms. You have students, you have the downtown project, you have people that are not here. So if you ever need to have talent visit, consulting, if you ever have a startup that wants to come here, and so you basically can facilitate an in-person meetup. This is before remote work really took off in the pandemic. You can do this, and I called it the Fusion Center to play on the nuclear stuff. But Fusion Center, bring all this stuff together and fuse it together. I would argue very, very lightly that the tech park at UNLV is sort of that. Not my idea. It's not a new idea. This is give people a place to work so that they can, I don't mean work like jobs. I mean workspace, right? Maker spaces, that's what those are. Maker spaces, co-work spaces. So have innovation spaces where you could actually execute innovative plans when startups visit here or relocate here to connect local talent, these entrepreneurial drivers, and the people that would enable that. The talent that was either here, nascent, or could be visiting and staying in any of our, I don't know what the number was then, but today it's 155,000 hotel rooms. So yeah, that was my early days. I had just started working at Intel, so people were willing to listen to me. I had some street cred. Oh, you're from Silicon Valley. Please step this way. Would you like 2 bottles of water, sir? So yeah, that was my introduction to Vegas. I learned a lot. The moment I got laid off from Intel a couple years later, after traveling a couple 100,000 miles and meeting many, many, many smart people in many different places, kind of putting Vegas in perspective, a great place to do what I suggested, Fusion Center, bring remote work, remote talent, remote ideation together in a post-pandemic era that really does make sense. you can definitely lean into the things that make Vegas what it is. And I'm saying this not ironically during the week of the Formula One, whatever you, based on your perspective, it's either a total cluster or maybe it's just another over-the-top event in Vegas. But lean into the fact that people do come here, but then also leave. You don't have to be the next of anything. You can be a better version of this and invite people, enable them. They're still a part of the economy. If you do it right, they can be contributing proactively. So that was my injection of insight at the time. But the moment I got laid off from Intel, I took the layoff. I could have moved to Oregon, but I kind of had enough. I always told people the reason I'm still at Intel at any given time during my tenure there is because I don't have to be at Intel. Intel was actually not the kind of company I would like to work for. I would prefer to work for. But the fact that I was traveling and engaging people directly, especially hackathons, a lot of really smart people, college students, high school students, working in the Intel labs, because obviously the engineers are cool. But Intel as a company was not really for me, so I figured I'll take the layoff and see what happens. But the moment that happened, no longer getting the easy meetings. That's where I learned that Vegas is much more about clout and what people think you're doing, not what you're actually doing. And that is why I can apply some of that to today, which I often have. So the things I've learned over the 10 years I've been here, since the moment I arrived, was the importance of the impression that people have of you, more so than actual you. It's critical that you pretend to be an entrepreneur, even if you are not in certain circles. You may be completely incompetent, but as long as you can pretend to be some sort of an expert in any combination of metaverse and Web3 and microfarming and AI, all kinds of stuff that you really have no idea what you're doing, but you just tell people. And if you take enough selfies, they are convinced. And this has happened countless times in the modern era. And so I always look with a skeptical eye at what's happening in the greater Vegas area. This is all developed over the last 10 years. So you have the normal Vegas, the one that you probably know and love. It is what it is. It's Vegas. The bumps and bruises, the shiny, highly polished and well-lighted places. And then there are some other places that need a lot of work. And that is a topic for another episode. I did mention I was gonna provide some minor details about the other party in my adventure. It was a person I'd known for many years. I think I'd known her for something like 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. I knew her for quite a while. She was, like I said, was going through marital problems, eventually divorced, had my fire. So the next day I said, hey, remember how we were out last night? And then I went home and I lived in a place. So she was quite helpful. Hey, let's go see if you can get a place to, another hotel room or something. So yeah, initially fine. Eventually, especially after we moved to Vegas, things went completely south. Very eye-opening. I will say, since I've not identified this person, I will say once we moved into this house officially, August 1st, probably August 2nd, she was going to be a bartender in Vegas because she was a bartender in Sunnyvale. So she was leaning in the doorway and said to me, I've decided to stop taking my medication. So about 30 days later, she was in jail for domestic violence. Good times. Like I said, eye-opening, not a story I tell so often because it's kind of relevant now. At the time, it was very educational, of course. Very distracting from trying to kind of restart in a new city. But luckily, once a person shows you their cards and you decide to bail, which you should always, with almost zero exception. So yeah, here it was a quiet relocation to an undisclosed location, which I called home for another, 7 years. And that was that. So yeah, part of my introduction to Las Vegas was very dark, but also very brief. She was out. She was out before November. That was done. So I must have gone to down because she and I went to Downtown Podcast once, and that was sort of hilarious because she is a Dunning-Kruger, vitriolic, violent person. But anyway, so my road to Vegas was paved with burning embers and swinging fists, but ultimately an interesting journey, ongoing. I have certainly learned a lot. I will end today's episode by reminding you that the show notes contain links to my Buy Me a Coffee and Coffee, Ko-Fi, pages. Those also link to some other podcasts I'm doing. If you like what you're hearing and you'd like to throw some money in the tip jar, great. I'm going to launch websites for all these things again. I used to have websites for stuff and had more time, so I'm spending that time again. So trying to do some interesting things. The innovateforvegas.org website has our podcast on there, the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. We're going to launch some cool stuff. That's all open source, volunteer. I make money by volunteering all of my time, and then I make it up in volume. So we're going to have some cool stuff for publicizing things so you can figure out what's going on and when and who's doing what podcast where and how. So yeah, my those two pages, those are on the show notes. So buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo and ko-fi notes here real quick. ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. So that's DANHUGO, just like it sounds. So those are linked in the show notes. There's a, like I said, a link to the Mercury News article about the fire way back then. I still have a video that somebody shot from across the street that I have somewhere. So it's quite a night. But memories, the beginning of a journey that has brought me here. Where will it take me tomorrow? I will probably do an episode about that next week. Next week it's Thanksgiving, but I will still do an episode because I'm going to take a break this weekend during the F1 Saturday race. I will be far away out of the blast radius. I hope that doesn't, I hope I'm not foreshadowing something, but there's just something about fast moving cars with crowds of people around that I've seen too many videos with tires flying off into the stands and stuff. So fingers crossed. I hope the only event is the one on the track. So we'll see how it goes, but I will not be here. So thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing with your friends and all the other stuff. Quaggling Sand is mostly me telling stories with some sort of connection to my own education or something that might be interesting for others. Here it is essentially the beginning of my education about how a city that is most definitely not Silicon Valley, where I had spent 13 years, how that city could believe one thing, but should really focus on something else, and my efforts to do that something else. So surely that will be many other episodes. But in the future, in the near future, we can talk about Silicon Valley. We can talk about Harvey Mudd College. We can talk about trips to Thailand and to Europe and to China and to Japan and how I need to travel more and so on and so on. The various companies I worked for. I worked for Netscape. The guy who invented JavaScript was on the other side of the cube wall. I worked at Apple in the Newton group. You probably don't know what the Newton is, but that was in there. A couple places, a couple of interesting pages in the Book of Dan. That's what we'll talk about. So yeah, my voice is barely going to make it to the finish line, and I'm glad you did. So thank you. Until next time.